Okay, here we go. On to chapter 13, encouraging devotion. 13 important points. Okay, we're back into the orally transmitted teachings. We're hitting the 13th chapter, and I assume most of you have been following along since chapter 1. We'll continue now. Point 1, concerning encouraging devotion. Now, at first, hearing encouraging devotion, you would think that it has to do with something that's going to encourage you to have devotion. Okay, this is really written as though you already have such devotion, and as a bodhisattva of the earth and a Buddha, you already understand you're going to need adversity. And so this is actually about taking the vow to go through whatever there is to go through in the process of getting to the 6th stage of practice. Okay? And then once you're in the 6th stage of practice, this is what we do. This is your job, okay? So, encouraging devotion, 13 important points. Point 1, concerning encouraging devotion. The Daishonin says, the record of the orally transmitted teaching says the word encouraging refers to the converting of others. Okay, so this is us as senior people of faith that have been doing this a while, that have gotten benefit, that have read the teaching, that have a background in study, understand it, agree with it, inspired by it. Okay, we're going to be encouraging others as part of our vow. Is we can't just do this for ourselves. We have to do it for everybody. We have to tell other people. We have to do shakabuku. Okay, when we do that shakabuku, the devilish functions, the 3 obstacles and the 4 devils are going to come out, because basically this is a point in time that you go into the mode of becoming a Buddha in your present form. Okay, when you deal with the shit that's going to be talked about in this chapter, you're already a Buddha in your present form. That's why it's occurring, and that's why you should not be frightened, intimidated, or even for a minute doubt whether or not you're going to win. Okay? So, the record of the orally transmitted teaching says the word encouraging refers to the converting of others. The word devotion refers to one's own practice. We're the ones that say we'll go through any kind of shit we got to because we're bodhisattvas of the earth, out of gratitude for finding this teaching, being taught this teaching ostensibly by the original teacher. I mean, you can't get much better than that. All right, so the record of the orally transmitted teachings, page 109, encouraging refers to the converting of others. The word devotion refers to one's own practice. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo embraces both the converting of others and one's own religious practice. We chant about everything, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so continuing on page 110. Now, Nichiren and his followers are encouraging others to adopt Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and to make it their own practice. Okay? That's that part. Point 2. Never begrudging our bodies or lives in the passage, but although it will be difficult to teach and convert them, we will summon up the power of great patience and will read and recite this sutra, embrace, preach, and copy it, offering it many kinds of alms, never begrudging our bodies or lives. That's how I try to live. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, Nichiren says, the word bodies, from never begrudging our bodies or lives, refers to the element of form or the body. The word lives refers to the element of the mind. Body and mind always together, right? One should never be begrudging of one's body. In other words, you should never worry about your safety within this phenomenal realm and this particular existence. Whatever goes down, as long as you're trying to serve the law with your whole life. You do not begrudge your life. You go through whatever you got to go through to do human revolution and be the Buddha in your present form. All right? One should never be begrudging of one's body or life, either in principle or in fact. So that's pretty strict, right? Were you willing to die for the sake of the law? Yes. Okay. When a votary of the Lotus Sutra is deprived of his lands and fields, this is a case of not begrudging body or life in principle. But when he is actually deprived of his life, this is a case of not begrudging body or life in fact. Now when Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, they are being unbegrudging of their bodies and lives, both in principle and in fact. So the in fact doesn't mean that we had to die. The in fact means that we went through whatever it was necessary to become victorious and to prove the power of the law, the validity of the teaching. Point 3 on the passage from 110. Point 3 on the passage, because in this Saha world, the people are given to corruption and evil, beset by overbearing arrogance, shallow in blessings, irascible, muddled, fawning, and devious, and their hearts are not sincere. A lot of hearts that are not sincere. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, Nichiren says, regarding the phrase, their hearts are not sincere, to take the Lotus Sutra, which says among those sutras, the Lotus is the foremost, chapter 10, the teacher of the law, and put it in third place, to regard the sutra as the lowest when it says among all the sutras, it holds the highest place, chapter 23, Medicine King, to say that the principle of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life embodied in the Lotus Sutra is found in the flower garland, Mahavrochana Sutras, the flower garland and Mahavrochana Sutras, to take doctrine of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form, to take the doctrine of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form and read it into the Mahavrochana Sutra, Mahavrochana Sutra. These are all examples of the heart not being sincere. So we don't really do any of that, okay? Now, Nichiren and his followers who chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo do so with hearts that are sincere, okay? So we don't have this issue because our hearts are sincere. Do you understand? You can tell the difference between a true bodhisattva of the earth and one that's a pretender, okay, by virtue of their actions, okay? What is coming from their life, okay? Point 4 on the passage, page 111, at the top. Point 4 on the passage, at that time the bodhisattvas respectfully complying with the Buddha's will and at the same time wishing to fill their own original vows, proceeded in the presence of the Buddha to roar the lion's roar and to make a vow, okay, which is exactly what we've done. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, to comply with the Lotus Sutra is what is meant by respectfully complying with the Buddha's will. By the Buddha's will is meant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, though, because this is the latter day of the law. This is the age of Kosen Rufu occurring, okay? This is the age of widespread propagation. I don't know why my mouth is watering so much. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says to comply with the Lotus Sutra is what is meant by respectfully complying with the Buddha's will. But the Buddha's will is what is the Buddha's will is meant by the Buddha's will is meant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So the Buddha's will is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Now when Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, it means they are respectfully complying with the Buddha's will. There's nothing in conflict in following the Daishonen's teaching that is in conflict with the Lotus Sutra and Shakyamuni's final greatest teaching. Point 5 on the words to roar the lion's roar, sa shishi ku. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says the lion's roar, shishiku, is the preaching of the Buddha. So I'm actually roaring the lion's roar right now. You can't hear me going, "Roar!" But what I'm doing is I'm preaching the law, and I'm teaching you the understanding for the latter day of the law that comes from the original teacher, Nichiren. So the record of the orally transmitted teaching says the lion's roar, shishiku, is the preaching of the Buddha. So every time any of us utilize our faith, practice, and study to be able to propagate the law correctly, we are already roaring the lion's roar in that action. The preaching of the law means the preaching of the Lotus Sutra. And the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law is always the Daimoku, right? Or the preaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in particular. Okay, so we utilize the Lotus Sutra as a framework to explain the actual principle of the truth of reality, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. The first shi of the word shishi, or lion, which means teacher, is the wonderful law that is passed on by the teacher. The second shi, which means child, is the wonderful law as it is received by the disciples. The roar is the sound of the teacher and disciples chanting in unison, because there's no separation between them. Teacher is not better than being disciple. All teachers were once disciples. The idea is you disciples, you're supposed to grow into teachers, to becoming teachers yourself. That's why you're taking note of what a teacher is expressing to you and making advance in your faith as a result. You're on your way to Buddhahood. Even if you're not there now, you're going to get there. Okay? So the roar is the sound of the teacher and the disciples together, chanting in unison. Okay? So the verb sa, in other words, again, is kosen rufu. The roar is the sound of the teacher and the disciples chanting in unison. What are they chanting? They're chanting the daimoku. Okay? The daimoku is what unifies all of us, regardless of what our karma is. The daimoku is the consistent thing that exists in all of us. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is our original state. Continuing at the bottom of page 111 to finish point 5. The verb sa, to make or to roar, should be understood to mean to initiate or to put forth. In referring to the initiating of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in the latter day of the law. So what did he just say there? He said, the sa, to make or to roar, should be understood to mean initiating the Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in the latter day of the law. The verb sa, to make or to roar, should be understood to mean to initiate or put forth, which is what we do when we preach the law, right? It refers to the initiating of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in the latter day of the law. That's what we preach. We preach the daimoku. We don't preach the Lotus Sutra. We use the Lotus Sutra as a reference because it's a provisional teaching. But we actually put forth the daimoku in the latter day of the law. Point 6 on the passage, world honored one, after the thus come one has entered extinction, we will travel here and there. 112. Back and forth through the worlds in the 10 directions. Okay? So as to enable living beings to copy this sutra, to receive, embrace, read, and recite it, understand and preach its principles, practice it in accordance with the law, and properly keep it in their thoughts. Okay? This says, brought, at the top, I've got this note, brought, point 6, on the passage, world honored one, after the thus come one has entered extinction, we will travel here and there, back and forth, through the worlds in the 10 directions, which is the 10 worlds, okay? So as to enable living beings to copy the sutra, to receive, embrace, read and recite it, understand and preach its principles, practice it in accordance with the law, and properly keep it in their thoughts. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, Nichiren says, those who practice it in accordance with the law are the great teachers Tentai, Myolo, Dingyo, and their like. Now when Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, they practice it in accordance with the law. They practice it in accordance with the lineage of teaching that really began with Chang'an's writing down what he had been taught by Tentai, and then that lineage from there where he qualifies Tentai. Myolo made all the annotations on Tentai's works. Dingyo who brought it to Japan and created the ordination platform, and their like, okay? But he says, now when Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, they practice it in accordance with the law, with the time, with the age. That's the thing that you've got to understand, is there's 1,000-year difference between Chentai and Dingyo, okay? And there's another 1,000-year difference between us and Dingyo. Okay, so the point is that this law manifests in various ways. It manifests as our lives, it manifests as the environment, it manifests as the basis of all things, but it also manifests in accordance with the time, the age. The teaching that we're to embrace is always the same in essence, but it may be different in the manner of practicing. Okay, so you've got something crawling up right there. Okay. Point 7, on the words, there will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us. Okay, because in the latter day, we're going to be attacked with swords and staves and weird shit like that, according to the Encouraging Devotion chapter. We're saying that maybe we're not attacked by swords and staves, but we don't care. We will not begrudge our lives if that ends up being the case. This is all really about is being willing to die. It's not about dying for anything, because you're the Buddha. You're basically covered as far as being able to manifest supernatural powers that save you from such a circumstance. Okay? But the willingness is a reflection of your faith. Okay? So the willingness to not begrudge your life is really your expression of faith in this lifetime as to the teaching that you've been blessed with hearing expounded. Point 7, on the words, there will be many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says this refers to those great oafs who do not understand even one word of the teachings. It is perfectly clear that they curse and speak ill of us. The word many here refers to such oafs in the country of Japan. So when we preach the law to others, we don't worry about whether or not they think we're all cool for doing that, okay? They can have any attitude that they want, and if it's an attitude of arrogance or rejection, then they are oafs. They are ignorant, and there's nothing you can do about their ignorance. You've tried to unlock the door you have by preaching the law to them, even though they will curse and speak ill of you. You still do shakabuku. You still expound Nam-myoho Renge-kyo for their ears to hear and for that connection to be initiated karmically with them. Point 8, on the passage on page 112 around the middle. Point 8, on the passage, in the evil age, there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. So again, he qualifies this as regular practitioners. This is people that have taken on the religious life and devoted their lives supposedly to the propagation of the law and to the teachings of the Buddha. But then in studying the teachings of the Buddha, that I've shown and realized, no, they're just following their own deal. They will suppose they have attained what they have not attained. They don't understand, and they're being proud and boastful in heart because they're now slandering by preaching a law that is not a correct law. Okay, it's slander. Okay, if you believe what they're saying, you can never attain Buddhahood in your present form. You're going to have to wait lifetimes, and it's not going to come back around to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo because you're not making the cause to initiate Nam-myoho Renge-kyo into the karmic flow of your life, which is eternal. You're never going to stop having these bodies. You're never going to stop having these lives. Okay, so get the most important ingredient up front and in center focus karmically for you, for the sake of your own life, whenever you incarnate. Okay, you do that in this lifetime by making this connection with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo that can never be severed, and that means standing up for it regardless of what you're doing. If somebody opposes it, you don't have to be impolite or get into a fight with them, but you need to make sure that they hear the daimoku. You must be brave enough to qualify the daimoku. You should chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Now, if you want to kick my ass, I'll get out of here. But don't forget I said that. Can you say Nam Myoho Renge Kyo? And if they say, I'm going to kick your ass, then you can leave. You've done everything you can. But make sure you, as the Buddha, have instilled in them, to the best of your ability, the seed of enlightenment. Okay? So the record of the orally transmitted teaching says the evil age referred to in this passage on the monks is of the evil age is the latter day of the law, the period that we live in right now ourselves. The monks are persons like Kobo, teachers that teach incorrect teachings, and others who slander the law. They cast aside the correct wisdom embodied in the Lotus Sutra and instead base themselves on the perverse wisdom of the provisional teachings. That's why those are all expedient means, you know. If Shakyamuni is rejecting all expedient means in his preaching of the Lotus Sutra, then we should understand that and understand that these perverse wisdom are the provisional teachings. That's what perverse wisdom is. It's something that fools people into doing the wrong thing when they could be doing the right thing. Now, Nichiren and his followers who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo represent correct wisdom in its highest form. So Nichiren is saying very clearly, those of us who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo represent correct wisdom in its highest form. There is no teaching higher than the teaching of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's the whole point. You understand that, right? Okay, so going on to point 9. On the passage where there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement who will claim they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind. Greedy for profit and support, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world, as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. These men, with evil in their hearts, constantly thinking of worldly affairs, they're not really being religious peoples or religious leaders at all, will borrow the name of forest-dwelling monks, qualifying themselves to be equal to them, and take the delight in proclaiming our faults, the votaries of the Lotus Sutra, saying things like this. These monks are greedy, referring to those of us propagating the Daimoku in the latter day. These monks are greedy for profit and support, and therefore they preach non-Buddhist doctrines, because they're saying basically Nam Myoho Renge Kyo isn't in anything that Shakyamuni said. So they're qualified. This is coming from the Lotus Sutra, by the way, and they're talking about Shakyamuni being this person that's doing this, more so even in the latter day of the law when it's Nichiren from a whole different country in Japan, away from India and so forth, okay? So he says, these monks are greedy for profit. They saying things like this, claiming that we are monks greedy for profit and support, and therefore they preach non-Buddhist doctrines. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, it's not a non-Buddhist doctrine, and they fabricate their own scriptures. Yeah, we read things in a completely different way in the latter day of the law than you may have at the time of Shakyamuni or in the former or the middle day. We do actual Ichinen Sanzen, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. You don't. All right? The record of the orally transmitted teaching says this refers to the third kind of the 3 powerful enemies who persecute the votaries of Lotus Sutra. Men like Ryokan. Such persons are regarded as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. And you know who Ryokan is, right? Ryokan is the True Word Precepts priest that was behind having Nichiren persecuted, sent to be executed at Tatsunokuchi, made sure he got exiled to Sato Island, and was really freaked out when he got off of Sato Island and came back. He is the Daishonin's mortal enemy. He basically qualified all of the Daishonin's followers as being his enemies, and he utilized his influence in the government to have them persecuted, and that's how we ended up with the Atsahara persecution with 3 farmers who would not, out of some number of people, that would not renounce their faith, even at the risk of their lives. They said, if you don't renounce this Nichiren and not the bullshit he's telling you, man, we're going to cut your head off. And they went ahead and said, do your worst. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And they were all executed. And so subsequently, that's not begrudging your life in fact, right? Okay, so such persons are regarded as though they were arhats, talking about ryokan, who possess the 6 transcendental powers, okay, which is a slander. All right, point 10. So you be aware of that obstacle of people that qualify themselves to be superior teachers and are utilizing outdated teachings as the basis for saying that. Things that are not in keeping with the age. Read the selection of time. Nichiren explains it in detail. Point 10. On the words, these monks fabricate their own scriptures to delude the people of the world. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, Nichiren says, this passage of the sutra shows how such arrogant monks slam to the votaries of the Lotus Sutra, accusing them of fabricating the sutra and reading it to others, accusing them of fabricating Nam Myoho Renge Kyo from the text, from the hidden in the text of the Lifespan chapter, and reading it to others. Point 11, on the passage, though they treat us with contempt, saying, you are all no doubt Buddhists, because that's the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, right? Oh, you are all no doubt Buddhas. All such words of arrogance and contempt, we will endure and accept. Okay, so I had a very close friend of mine who's a Nichiren Shoshu member that I'll never forget, because Nichiren Shoshu doesn't teach you that to attain Buddhahood in your present form. They say there's some sort of like last moment of life transaction, and then you'll experience Buddhahood in your next lifetime. But they don't teach you're going to attain Buddhahood now. Okay, I've only got 2 more to go, baby, and I'm done. All right, so the point is that we will endure and accept all of these things. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says the passage of the sutra illustrates how such monks will treat the votaries, all right, of the Lotus Sutra, of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, with contempt, calling them living Buddhists, which is exactly what we are. That's the way they insult us, by calling us what we are and them being too obtuse to understand that that is the truth. That is the case, okay? Through their contemptuous attitude, they commit slander. Through that attitude of saying, well, you're all Buddhists, huh? That contemptuous attitude that is slander, okay? That's not questioning what you're preaching. That's judging it, okay? Now Nichiren and his followers who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo are spoken of in this manner, and we accept it. Point 12, on the passage, evil demons will take possession of others. Are we over?
No.
Point 12, on the passage, evil demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says the evil demons are persons such as Honen and Kobo. Okay, those are the ones that brought True Word and Nimbutsu to, or maybe True Word, just True Word, excuse me, and mixed up everybody in Japan. The record that brought it from China. The record of the orally transmitted teachings actually Kobo did, and then Honen preached it. The evil demons are persons such as Honen and Kobo. Take possession of others means that they will exercise their influence over the ruler, high ministers, and the people of the country. It is referring to the hatred that such persons bear toward Nichiren and his followers who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, because we're a threat to their power and authority. We're not listening to what they're saying. A demon is one who snatches away the life of others, or who snatches away blessings. The Lotus Sutra is the life source of the Buddhas of the 3 existences and of past, present, and future. The life source. Okay, so the Lotus Sutra, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, is the manner in which all Buddhas become Buddhas. It's the law by which they are able to become Buddhas in their present forms and attain Buddhahood in a single lifetime. The Lotus Sutra is in any given lifetime. The Lotus Sutra is the life source. It is the original state of all the Buddhas of the 3 existences of a past, present, and future, Kuan. This sutra is a sacred writing that contains within it the blessings of all the bodhisattvas throughout the three existences, because they all became Buddhas thanks to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Voice hearers and cause awakened ones didn't listen because they only cared. They didn't shakabuku anybody. Understand that. Point 13 on the passage, we care nothing for our bodies or lives. They must go up the chain to become bodhisattvas. That means they're going to do that in another lifetime. Point 13 on the passage, we care nothing for our bodies or lives, but are anxious only for the unsurpassed way. This is the last one. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, in the middle of page 114, the unsurpassed way is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. We care nothing. We care nothing for our lives. We care nothing for our bodies or lives, but are only anxious to understand the Daimoku. Is what that text is really qualifying, and he's qualifying it here. The unsurpassed way is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. What you're already doing. Now Nichiren and his followers are even more anxious with regard to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo than they are with regard to their own lives, because we don't begrudge our lives for the sake of the law. That is why at the conclusion of this chapter we find the words, the Buddha must know what is in our hearts. That is, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, must know and understand what is in the hearts of the votaries of the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha referred to the conclusion of the chapter is Shakyamuni, and our hearts refers to the hearts of Nichiren and his followers who now chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Because this is quoting the Lotus Sutra, which is a provisional teaching. This is the teaching for the latter day of the law, what Nichiren is saying. So he says again, the Buddha referred to in the conclusion of the chapter is Shakyamuni. That's the one that goes on to peaceful practices, okay? And our hearts refers to the hearts of Nichiren and his followers who are actually Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, thus come ones. And I'll stop there. We'll go on to page 115 and chapter 14 next time we get together. Thank you very much.